far you have come on your own, but never alone. Through the rain and through the shine, here's your moment, it's your time. You stood tall and now you see, standing in your destiny. 100 women growing strong. 100 women where you belong. You stood tall and now you see, you have reached your destiny, woman, woman.
As people of African descent, we offer this land recognition in solidarity with the indigenous peoples of Turtle Island in the efforts and deliberate intentions toward decolonization. As people of African descent, we acknowledge the land of Turtle Island that sustains us, express deep gratitude to its indigenous peoples, and pledge to honor our dignity and divinity that ultimately connects us all. By Kay Johnson. Welcome to 100 ABC Fireside Chats. 100 Accomplished Black Canadian Women is a bold project initiated by co-authors and co-founders, the Honorable Dr. Jean Augustine, Dr. Denise O'Neill Green, and Donna Jones Simmons. Our mission is to celebrate and archive the professional accomplishments of trailblazing Black women from all across Canada. The goal is to create an ever-expanding database available for current and future generations via print media, public and private libraries, as well as our website, which is www.100abcwomen.ca. In addition to our fireside chats on topics that matter to our communities, such as education, healthcare, entertainment, creative arts, trade union, and so much more, we offer biennial book launching galas and biannual symposiums. The co-authors and co-founders would like to take this opportunity to thank each of you for attending today's fireside chat. We know that you will find these sessions educational and inspirational. So sit back, relax, and hear from our brilliant and talented honorees.
Welcome, welcome, welcome. Welcome to ABC Women's Fireside Chat. We are so pleased that you have decided to spend your Sunday afternoon with us today. Today, we'll be discussing a critical and very important topic, acknowledging and valuing different parenting lifestyles. It is a struggle for many parents, for as you know, despite the many books that are written, parents typically go to their friends, their family, right, or their gut instincts. Many of our Black youth appear to be straying at times. We must begin that relationship in the early years. And before I begin, I'd like to remind all that are watching today, we invite you to place your questions and comments in the chat. Now, your parenting lifestyle can affect everything from your child's self-esteem and physical health to how they relate to others. It's important to ensure that your parenting lifestyle is supporting healthy growth and development, because the way you interact with your children and how you discipline them will influence them for the rest of their lives. Research has shown, and they have identified 4 main types of parenting styles: authoritarian, authoritative, permissive, and uninvolved, right? And we're going to have guests that will discuss the other plethora of parenting styles. Well, first, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Kathy McDonald, and I'm a trustee with the Peel District School Board. I'm also a past recipient, as well as a mother of 4 change makers. And with me today is the amazing Norma Faye Nicholson. Norma Faye is the founder and CEO of Ignite Press Consultant. She's a retired nurse with a master's in art in adult education and a BA in sociology with a minor in psychology. She's a 5-time self-published author. She's an educator, a public speaker, and a community advocate for at-risk youth and families. She connects literature and education, impact, and how they impact minority families. She's an ardent volunteer in our community, and she was also an ABC honoree. And I'd just like to encourage all of you to get her latest book, which is quite amazing. It's entitled End the Incarceration of Black and Minority Youth. So with that, I'd like to welcome you, Norma, to the program.
Thank you, Kathy. I am pleased to be here today, and I hope that I can share some of my knowledge with those that have tuned in. And I'm open to questions because I find that as adults, if we can get some of our questions answered, then we can go away with tangible tools to use. So do you have a question for me, or would you like me to say some of what I do to help parents?
Well, I have a lot of questions for you, Norma. But before, I'd actually like you to tell us a little bit about your journey and your suggestions as based on your experiences.
I am a retired nurse, and I had been nursing for 46 years. I nursed in a variety of healthcare settings, and the last place I did my nursing was working as a healthcare leader for our incarcerated youth in one of the largest youth custody facilities in Ontario. I'm also a mother of 5 children. They're now young adults. In fact, I have grandchildren. I continue to be a volunteer in my community, and one of my goals I advocate for is to work in diversion programs and to work with families to keep their children out of the criminal justice system. I work with Associated Youth Services of Peel in their justice diversion program. And it's amazing the little things that young people can get into, why they follow the pathway. And sometimes it's because they're in the wrong place. And their color, the way they dress, the way they speak. And so I really empathize with parents that have such a challenge in assisting some of their children. Some are dynamic role models, but there are other children, for whatever reason, they head down the wrong path. And that's why we as parents, we don't have a community as they did like in the Caribbean or in Africa. Some parents are on their own with their children. So that is why this should be a good discussion. What are other things that parents can do other than what they're doing, or what can they change in order to support and build relationships with their children?
Yeah, thank you for that, Norma. So let me ask you right off the top. Would you say that it was harder to raise, or it was harder to raise kids when you were raising your kids, or do you think it's harder to raise kids now?
It's yes and no, because when I was raising my children, they did not have as much access to technology.
Mhm.
So we would sit and have our supper, and then we would talk about what happened in school if they were all together, because sometimes some were off with sports or with their friends. But we would talk about what happened as opposed to saying, put the cell phone away, or we need to talk now. And it's very hard to get them engaged because their friends are calling on their cell phones. And those times when my kids were growing up, we did similar things like parents do now. We connected with the teacher, we attended teachers' meeting and parent meeting. We helped to develop the plans. But what is similar now in some schools, parents are working very hard to provide for their kids. They do not always have time to attend these parent and teacher interaction. And in these days, kids are on the internet and social media. So I'll say it's yes and no. When my kids were growing up, it was hard, but it could be harder for parents now.
Thank you for that. And you know, a lot of times when kids are successful, you know, the parents are often told, "Oh, you're so lucky." And I know that as a parent of 4 kids, that it's not luck, it's hard work, it's a lot of time. And you had mentioned about working in one of the largest youth facilities in the province, if not Canada. So would you say there's a link between parenting styles and incarceration of our youth?
Yes. And as a parent, I really try not to place blame on parents. What I would like to do is uplift parents and encourage them to unlearn some of the kind of strategies they use to discipline their children. So I want to give two concrete examples. So here's a 16-year-old that may have come from any Afro-Caribbean nation to live with mom and dad. They have seen the 16-year-old male many times when they went on vacation. Now the 16-year-old has come to live permanently, so excited about living in Canada, going to high school. Both parents work, and there are strict rules for this 16-year-old. Get home on time, do your homework, all alone because there's no adult around until a certain time. Yeah, so what does that 16-year-old do? Missing friends and family that he or she had prior to coming to Canada. So they go to seek friends. They may invite friends over, though parents have said no friends when we're not at home. And so it's, what should my son be doing after school, as opposed to saying, you must do this, you must do that. So build a relationship to say, son, let's share what you can do and why it is important that you be at home. So I've seen many young children, anywhere from 13 to 17, left on their own in the evenings or in the mornings, and they go away from what their parents want for them. They get themselves in trouble and get incarcerated.
Mm-hmm.
Here's another group, and I'm saying group because there's so many similarities. Mom and dad says, you be home, your curfew is 10 o'clock, and you have no phone, you haven't yet gotten a cell phone to call and say, I'm going to be late. So you show up at 10:30. Mom and dad are very upset that you have not abided by the curfew. So what is sometimes done? You sit down, we talk about this so this never happens again. And this young man or a young woman may get very upset, and instead of listening, they stomp off to their room. Then the emotional conversation continues until there are times when that young person will leave home, end up in the shelter. I don't blame parents. What I would like to see parents doing is zipping their lips and using their ears, because that young person who came at 10:30 instead of 10 may have had a reason, was not given the opportunity to tell mom or dad why he was late. The other thing is, when parents are upset, it's because of the way some of us were brought up. When parents are upset, unless it's an emergency like a fire or something like that, leave the emotional conversations till you're calm. So today, being the 28th of January, if you go to the youth shelter that is close to my home, or go to the Young Street Mission, you will see a lot of young people who have parents, but they have no homes. And those are the kids that end up being incarcerated. The gangs are waiting for them. I will give you a better life. I will give you a car. I will give you the home your parents are not offering. So those are the kids that I see that are incarcerated. Peer relationships take them down the wrong way because sometimes parents don't spend enough time and don't build that relationship.
Thank you so much for that. And you mentioned unlearning. And speaking of unlearning, I'd like to bring up our next panelist, an award-winning community leader. Mante serves on the board of the governors of the Ottawa Hospital. She's a founding member and former chair of the Parents for Diversity, an organization committed to addressing equitable and inclusive education. She's also a former director of Amnesty International Canada, Eco Equitable, and the Parkdale Food Centre, as well as a former elected member of the Ontario Bar Association Council. So welcome, Mante Molipo.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
And thank you. I can't see, I'm not sure if your camera is on or it's working, but I don't.
Yeah, I'm having quite a lot of connection issues, so I thought I would keep it off, because when I tried to turn it on, it wasn't working, and then I was losing reception. So sorry about that.
Okay. So thank you for joining us. And I just want to ask you, what advice do you have for parents that are raising, for example, before I ask you that question, what are examples of parenting styles that you can?
I mean, there are many that I've come across anecdotally, personally, and then just through the reading that I've done as a parent. I would say there's, the kind of laissez-faire parent who tends to be, and polarizing, who very lenient and lets the child be also like a friend in the relationship, so less disciplinarian. And then at the far end of the spectrum, you'd probably have more of an authoritarian, my way or the highway. You're meant to be seen, not heard. And I'm sure many of us from the Afro-Caribbean community can can relate to that. And then as I was raising my two children, learning other forms of parenting, so I'll more of a conscious parenting approach where you see your child as someone who is not just your child, but their own being. And, you know, my role as a parent is to nurture who they are rather than, you know, to impose who I am on them, if that makes sense. And so as a parent, I've really tried that conscious parenting. I grew up in a household, very traditional African values of, you know, you don't speak back, your parents are always right, very disciplinary. And that really was hard because I didn't get that wiggle room and autonomy to figure out my own mistakes because I was always raised under, you know, often raised under the fear of like, I better not upset my parents. And I don't think that did anything good for our relationship, but also for me as a child growing up. And I think as a parent, I'm trying to kind of navigate that with a little bit of a different approach. If that makes sense.
Thank you for that. Now, what would you say that you think would work best for children of African descent?
I think it's so important as parents for us to see our children for who they are. You know, again, maybe it's also, you know, being first generation Canadian, your parents have very high expectations of, you know, you need to go to university, you need to achieve a highly successful job. At some point, every Black parent has this conversation with their child, which is you have to work twice as hard to get half as far. And it really always resonated with me. And so the expectation was high academic achievement. And not every child is geared towards, you know, education and high academic achievement or post-secondary success. And achievement for a human being looks and feels so many different ways. And I think in terms of advice, that would be, you know, see our children for who they are, nurture their very being, the very core of who they are, and reinforce those values of, you know, respect and humility and community. But ultimately, we have to kind of accept that we are not our children and we shouldn't expect and impose who we are on our children. And I think for any parent, but I would say in particular for Black parents or parents of African descent, it's not the easiest thing in the world to do.
Absolutely. And I remember growing up in Jamaica, and my aunt, as you spoke about, not all children are, you know, academically inclined. And my aunt, who is a medical doctor and she's married to a lawyer, and her daughter felt, I guess, the pressure of, oh, she has to excel. And, you know, one day she said to my aunt, oh, what if I don't want to be a doctor or a lawyer? What if I want to be just a plain madwoman in Mandeville? And to which my aunt said, you know, if you want to be a madwoman, you're going to be the best madwoman. You're going to put on a show in the square. You're going to make sure that, you know, everybody knows who you are, right? And that was an extreme example, but it just highlights the importance of being the best at what you do. And I think that's the most important message we need to give to our children. Be it sweeping the streets, make sure that, you know, your streets are shine, you know, there are no garbage left behind when you're picking up garbage. I think is that work ethic is the most important message that children should be getting. And I think when we are trying to give messages to our children, as you said, Norma, it's important to listen. You know, it's almost like listen about 80%, talk about 20% of the time, right? Because I think it's important for children to feel valued and to feel heard. It's important for them to feel that somebody cares. And that's not to say that, oh, we're going to allow them to do whatever they want to do. But I think it's important for them to know that we support them, even when they make their mistakes. Because, you know, I think making mistakes can be a good thing because they are often very good learning opportunities. You know, the mistakes that we should be concerned about are the ones that are really devastating, right? We try and avoid them from making those huge, devastating mistakes. But I think we have to give our kids confidence as they navigate life. And Norma, when you are speaking, the question came to me that I'd like you, if you could discuss in your experience, what are some of the situations you see where Black parents seem to interact harshly with their kids? And what are some alternatives? You're on mute.
Sometimes it's the perception of the person watching this interaction with the parents. And before I go on, Kathy, someone in the chat had said, when I talked about unlearning, it's very nice to talk about unlearning strategies that are not beneficial to the development of our children. I thank that listener for that. Yeah, because if we continue things that are not beneficial to the growth and development of our children, they can't grow. Okay, so what are some of the things that I have observed? I'll take supermarket, for example. Mom is gathering groceries, the cart is going around, little one is running around and wandering off, maybe a 6 or 7-year-old. I want this, mommy, I want that. And mom says, you get here, stay with this cart. Don't do that. And then that little one may say, but mommy, I want that. And then mom gets more upset because she is hoping this child would behave and she could focus on gathering the groceries, pay for them, and leave the store. So what she may do, not to hurt the child, but for someone watching, is to pull this child close to the cart and say in a very firm voice, stay there. Now the child begins crying. So the emotions are elevated and people are watching. And I empathize with the mom. But what I have seen that is beneficial is like getting down to the level of the child, forget the groceries for a minute, get down to the level of the child and just say, hon, I know you may want that, but let's get the grocery and then we will talk after. Whatever the parent is able to say that will soothe that child, but not to shout and to say, you do this, because that's embarrassing for her, for people that are watching, and it's embarrassing for the child that she's trying to discipline, yet she's disciplining the way she knows. So here it is again about unlearning behaviors. Yeah. Another thing that I have seen, and because I have accompanied some parents to go into the school to talk with the teachers, they are so upset. The parents are so upset that my child has been suspended from school. So I sit with the parents and I say, do you have some idea of what is going on in the school? And they may have some idea, but they do not have the details. So they're going with a very angry emotion. So what I help the parents to do is write down what the child said, listen to the teacher, have both interpret what needs to be done to support that child. And I'm sitting there taking the notes. And if that mom starts getting upset, I press her toe with my shoe. Because when you're upset, when emotions come out, you cannot have a favorable conversation. So it's just little things. I have not come across any parent that does not love their children. None. the love and they may not say every day, John, I love you, because that's not the way they were brought up, but from their actions, from the time they spend with their kids. So I think for parenting styles, as someone had mentioned, I think Monte, there are different types of parenting styles. Sometimes what we use inside the home, we should not use out in public, because it's the perception of the individuals that are watching, and it's not beneficial to the children. In fact, you're trying to help them behave, but in fact, the way you say it and the way you do it may be shameful for them.
And thank you for that. And you brought me back to a memory. I remember when one of my kids, I was out in the mall and they were having a tantrum. And I would preface that by saying it was the one and only tantrum, because my inclination, because I think it's important not to escalate the situation and to de-escalate it. And I was not giving in to his demands. It was the IT store. I don't know if anybody remember the IT store, and had all those lights and flashy gadgets and gizmos. And I was not buying it. And, he started to cry and was throwing himself on the ground. And I just stood back and I watched him carrying on. And I didn't feel at all embarrassed. I know some people may have felt embarrassed or probably embarrassed for me, but I was like, nope, he's still not getting whatever. And I was just waiting for him to finish. And he realized he wasn't getting it, and he threw himself on the floor and he actually banged his head. And then he was like, ow. And then I just turned to him and said, are you finished now? And he's like, yes, mom. And never again had he thrown a tantrum, because I think my parents said I like to, I would say like an experiential learner. So he realized that, listen, you're still not going to get what you want by crying and having a hissy fit, and you only hurt your own self when you throw yourself on the ground. And, never. And I told all the kids that follow the story, and none of them, I guess they figured having a tantrum was not a good idea, right? And I think sometimes too, when, the grocery store example, a lot of kids, it might be 11 o'clock at night, they're shopping, or 10 o'clock, and they are having a really hard time because it's their bedtime, right?
Mm-hmm.
And think as an adult, when I am tired, I am sometimes a little cranky, right? So we have to remember that, to look at the situation and not escalate it. So I think, it's important. And again, that goes again to building relationships. So the kid realizes too that, they're trying to push your boundaries, but nope, these are the boundaries. And it's a gradual building relationship process, I would say. And I would ask Mante, I'm glad that you got the camera sorted out. And I just wanted to ask you, what advice would you have for parents that are raising a sensitive child? So you may have, it's beyond, say, having a tantrum, a child not getting their way, but you have children, their personality, they're very sensitive. What advice would you give to parents?
Sometimes people say meet them where they're at. And I often struggle with that, especially if you're a parent with a different personality.
Mm-hmm.
And so really, I think where empathy and compassion become really important. Mm-hmm. And if you have a sensitive child, it means that they feel the world in a way that is really heightened. And so big feelings, big emotions, maybe a little bit more reactionary than the average child. And so I think having a lot of patience for them is really critical, guiding them. And when they have those big emotions is, sometimes our just reaction is to also yell back. And I really like Norma's advice is just being calm and at ease and explaining, like we don't speak to each other like that, setting the tone and expectations, but just communicating in an even, patient, and compassionate way. And I think I can really a big conflict. and then bring that child to understand that you can feel big, right? This is something I've tried to do with my kids is we are not our feelings. So sometimes when we're having big feelings, it's you're more than entitled to feel anger or sadness or joy, all of it. But how you choose to react is another thing. So you have to be mindful of how you choose to react. And sometimes, especially for younger kids who cannot rationalize their big emotions, they just know that I feel very angry right now. So I've said, when they were younger, let's take a step away from our emotions. Like, I am, Lisa, but I am not my anger. I am not my sadness. I'm not my joy. And then allows you to observe your emotions without letting them define who you are, if that makes sense. And I found that a really important tool to help when we're having those big emotions to kind of start to take a step back and say, I can feel all these things. Take a deep breath, a few deep breaths, and start to say, well, I can see myself being angry, but I am not anger. And that helps us as parents, not labeling our children as well. Sometimes you can say, oh, I have a sensitive child, but they're not always sensitive, or I have an angry child, but they're not always angry, or I have a joyful child, they're not always joyful. And I think that's helped me as well as a parent.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And, in my role as a trustee, I can tell you that 99.9% of the times, in my opinion, behaviors are symptoms of other things,
Yes.
right? Or they are messages, right? For children who they don't have the vocabulary, the advocacy skills, or the tools to deal with what emotions they are going through. I can tell you a lot of times too, as someone who sits on what we call the supervised alternative learning programs. So when we have kids that are having attendance issues at school and they may want to go out to work, they need a little break from school, or they may have anxiety. A lot of the kids in that program, they actually would tell you about the stress and conflict at home, right? As well as same thing with discipline. A lot of times you realize, oh, this kid, seemed to have been doing well at school, and all of a sudden they have discipline issues. Then what triggered it, right? A lot of times it's issues going at home. So I think it's very important to read and listen and dig deep to find out what is the message or what are the symptoms that the kid has. And Norma, when you, based again on your work, when you, can you give tips to the parents? Like when you as a parent are going to be speaking to your kids during challenging times, what advice do you have for parents?
You have to get that moment. Yeah, you have to plan that moment with input because, for example, just getting in the door from school and excited about what I did and throwing my books on the floor instead of putting it on my desk, that's not the time for me as a parent to say, this happened and I want you to sit down and we talk about it. They just close down. They won't. So it's like choosing the moment. See, sometimes parents may say, John, this happened and we need to talk about it now. Well, John has had no preparation. So what would be better if available is to go for a walk around the block with John and just say what you're observing and have John fill in the gap. So you may be observing that John is getting home from school and instead of going to his desk, put the book down and maybe go and have a snack, he just throws his book down and he's on his phone or he's steps on the couch and is watching TVs. That's not the time to have the conversation, except to say, could you please sit with your feet on the floor. And yeah, go for a ride with your kids if you're a driver. That's an audience they can't run away from. And you're looking at the road and you're driving, let them do the talking. Yeah, you could sit on a park bench and look at the lake if you're living nearby. And it's amazing conversations that will come up with your children that they direct. And you have now found out what was causing the behavior that you're seeing. The other thing is being Black parents, we sometimes listen to the stigma that happens around ourselves and our children. So, for example, the teenage years is a difficult time where teens, their bodies, their minds, everything is changing. They want to be free to go with their friends and do whatever. And then all of a sudden, I like the name John because it's easy to remember. John starts smoking, and you think, oh my goodness, he's doing a little part-time job. He's using money to buy cigarettes. And then John may come in one evening from visiting a friend, and you smell alcohol on his breath. And oh, as a parent, I'm fuming. Why is this happening? Or John, who is an outgoing teenager, may start withdrawing to his room, isolating himself. And we as parents are just ready to get in there and say, you get up, you get dressed, you go to school, what is happening? But it is in the teenage years where so many changes are happening in their body and their brains that there's sometimes some kind of mental challenges. Bullying can lead to depression. Racism can lead to mental illness. Stressors at home or stressors with your peers can lead to a lot of challenges. So listen to your children, even if you want to be the one who is speaking. And when you go, some teenagers don't even want you to go inside when the doctor is talking with them. You may go because your daughter is a diabetic and you just need to get her diabetes reviewed, but you may find that her blood sugars are up because she's not taking her insulin as she normally would. Well, talk to the doctor and say, could you please just find out emotionally, not physically, emotionally, psychologically. She may getting depressed. All kids are running around. I have to be worried about giving needles and testing my blood sugar. And if it's caught that way, because some medical physicians, they just look at what brought you to the office. They don't look at holistic health. So those are a few of the tips for parents. Listen to your children, spend time with them. You know that they don't know it all, though they will tell you, I know. When you build a relationship with them, walk with them, talk with them in the park. And there's Mante ready to add a few more things that she has seen worked. Yeah, because I look back to when my kids were young, and sometimes I used to be so upset when they're running through the door and tumbling over anything. And I said, you're home, settle down. And they said, oh, Mom, you don't know what day I had. I didn't have skills to say, let's talk about it later when you're calmer. I used to say, let's talk about it now. And they don't say anything.
Yeah, absolutely.
Fine.
And you know, Mante, I'm going to ask you this question because a lot of times, again, in my experience as a school board trustee, you find, for example, at school councils, they have lots of parent engagement. They're very engaged. But by the teenage years, you're lucky if you have two people on council, right? And that's the years where parents tend not to come in as much. They're not as hands-on speaking with the teachers. So I just want to know, what are your thoughts on parent engagement?
That's such a good question, Kathy. I think one of the challenges we have in non-Western, non-European societies is the idea that parent engagement is, showing up at school council meetings and going to, volunteer at the bake sale or the book fair, and going on field trips. And, it's not like that. My parents were highly educated. They instilled the values of education for us. And they were engaged in a different way, where at home, it was like, okay, have you done your homework? What are you doing to pursue, like, to prepare for your exams? Are you doing your university applications? Or always reinforcing the importance of an education. And I think if we use this quote unquote like Canadian idea of parent engagement, they probably would have failed. And so I always, when I work with parents and school boards, I always say parent engagement looks very different. And especially in parts of the global majority, we're not always there for school council, but we're engaging in other different ways. So really trying to appreciate the breadth of that. And I do agree, I did do school council at elementary, and now and I did find it also depends on the degree to which parents feel welcome on school council. If the school council tends to be very homogenous and not representative of the diverse racialized communities maybe that the school exists in, and if you have now a parent who, a Black parent on a predominantly white school council, how comfortable and welcome do they feel? Are the school council members engaging with them and making them feel welcome, giving them a voice at the table? So these are things that I always have had to think about as a parent, and also as somebody on school council. But I really just wanted to emphasize that. And Norma, you made a good point about bullying and like the impact of that and racism. And I think also too, when we're talking about our kids' experiences in school and how we discipline our kids as Black parents and parents of Black children, growing up, maybe the idea was, at least for many of my friends, was, when you are experiencing racism, it's just water off a duck's back, or the sticks and stones, and you're trying as a parent to teach your child resilience in the face of racism, because anti-Black racism is very systemic. But I think in terms of gentle conscious parenting is really understanding how your child internalizes racism and talking to them about it, while also really strongly validating their racial identity. And as a parent, my kids are mixed race, but growing up, I always bought them books that celebrated their hair, their African culture, that they always saw themselves represented in literature. And amongst my Black friends, it was really important they had other Black women as role models, so that when they went out into school and to the world and they experienced racism, they internalize it, of course, but they could also articulate it and share with it. And one example, and this is minor, but my daughter has they both have beautiful hair, but the younger one, being sensitive, people would always just touch her hair, and I think because she's quiet in nature, people would just touch it, and she hated it. And so I bought her a book by a Black author about, like, please don't touch my hair. And it was such a great children's book, and we read it together, and she fell in love with the book. And then she developed her own agency to tell people when they touched her and pet her like an animal, please don't touch my hair, I don't like it. But like, I could have done that advocacy for her, and I did, but it really came across as so much more empowering for her to do it herself. But I think as Black parents, we really want to be able to equip our kids with those abilities so that they can navigate systemic anti-Black racism often when we're not present.
Absolutely. And, I giggled. I know the book. I also bought the book for the same reason. Yeah. And I have two daughters with two totally different types of hair. And yeah, it was a good book. Now, when back to the parent engagement piece as a while piece, I also, so as you're quite correct when you say it's not always about school councils for parent engagement, but even in my experience, things like checking homework. So your kid would come home in kindergarten and you look at all the work and like, oh my gosh, this is so amazing. Even if they did 3 scribbles, right? And they feel validated, like, wow, this is beautiful. But I find it tends to decrease as the kids, progress in their educational journey, and even at university. And, I talk to parents and say, do you even ask your kids how are they to see their grades at university, right? To make sure, and because I think it's really important to guide our children without being a helicopter parent, right? But I think it's and kids, from my experience too, feel valued. They feel like, oh, you do care, right? When you check on them, and sometimes you may in a situation where kids may act like, oh my gosh, they're so embarrassed, but they tell you, oh, deep down they're happy that you are there, right? And I think our kids sometimes send us mixed signals, but it's important to, again, that building the relationship, talking with them to really find out. Like I remember when my one of my sons was going off to high school, and I said, "Do you feel embarrassed? Like if if I come and I hug you when you're dropping you off?" And at first it was like looking around, and then eventually as he got older, he would initiate coming up and hugging me, right? So again, kind of allowing them to sort of navigate their changes, especially in those confusing teenage years,
Yeah.
right? And coming into their selves. I think that's really, really important. And another thing that I'd like both of you to comment on, which again, from my experience, I think is really important when you're thinking about how as parents, Black parents, we not only discipline our kids, but react and support our kids when they get in trouble, right? So I'd like, so Norma, I'll start with you first. If you can give me, or would you like to give any tips to the audience listening on how should we go about supporting our kids when they are in the wrong and when they have done, things that there are going to be consequences for as parents? How should we?
Refrain from blaming them, though. We should not start out the conversation by saying, you did this and you did this and you were wrong. Because there are many sides to a story. And in fact, some folks look at conflict as negative, but conflict can be good in that where there's a conflict, you can work it out together. So I'll take any behavior. Say your daughter comes home from school, she's 12 years old, and you said to her, well, how was school today? And she said, I don't want to talk about it because I got into a fight with a kid and I'm sure they're going to be calling you. And you say, well, what caused the fight? Maybe an approach would be, do you want to have a cold drink of lemonade or something? Tell me more. You sound very upset. Tell me more so that together we can help to resolve this issue. And then eventually your daughter may say where she went wrong because she's being validated. She's being feel valued as a person. She feels love. And though she may have done something wrong, or not may have, she's done something wrong, you have taken the time to listen. You have said you will go with her to resolve it. And then you get an email that says, your daughter and you or your husband, both of you, you come to the school tomorrow because this is what happened when your daughter got in a fight today. Or it may be the police officer knocking on the door to say, we need to talk with you. But she's had the opportunity to talk with you, to get validated, to know that you're going to be there, not saying that she was right, but you will listen and help to resolve the situation. Yeah.
Thank you. And Mante, your comments on the same?
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, and I think it's you know, there's so many different sides to a story, and I think it's always trying to unpack what happened, get their perspective, and get the context, because context is everything. And I think when your child is in the wrong and you know that they, like, objectively speaking, are in the wrong, is what to do to hold them accountable. And we often think discipline is punishment, but the true meaning of discipline means to teach, right? So how do we turn this into a teaching opportunity for the child to learn? Because again, if we just instill fear through punishment, they're not going to walk away with a true understanding of how they can be accountable and own their mistakes. But if we guide them to teach them why what they said or did was problematic and harmful, then I think that can go a long way in holding them accountable, but also preventing them from engaging the same behavior again.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
if I may add, Kathy, as you say, as we have this discussion, it reminds us about our
Yeah.
own children. And and I'm just thinking of a time when my son went to visit his friend, and we're Black family. I don't know, he didn't have a phone, and he stayed there until he fell asleep. Well, we could not sleep. We didn't want to call the police because we didn't want him to have a record, because some parents don't know that just interacting with police, good or bad, it's a record. That means you've encountered police in the past. And when he got home that morning, and all I could do, instead of being angry, I just hugged him. And I say, we're going to talk about this later, because you have a mom and a dad that is going out to work without any sleep. And boy, when we got home, he was ready to say what he would do different the next time. Because I know if we had a conversation with him that morning, it would not benefit him at all, would not benefit us. We hardly had any sleep. And for one thing, I tell parents, unless something horrific has happened, don't call the police first about your children.
And Mante, I agree with you when you said context is everything.
Yes.
Because again, in my work, they have what they call mitigating circumstances, right? There are also, as you say, there are different sides to a story. So invariably, the child may be wrong in quotations because, I would say Dwayne struck John, but that's what the teacher saw. The teacher didn't see John provoking or striking Dwayne, right? So, and oftentimes our children don't get the benefit of the doubt. They don't get to tell their side of the story. So it is really important for parents to believe their children and support them. Right? You even if it reaches to at school level, like say it's a suspension, you can challenge it. Right? Don't just, because it's interesting when you hear how many people, and look at the prison system. Just, I think it was about 3 days ago, there was somebody in prison for 50 years for a crime he didn't commit, and he kept saying, I'm innocent, right? And then, you have advent of DNA, and then sometimes people, as they get older, feel guilty that, okay, they have put somebody wrong in prison and may confess. But I would encourage parents not to write off your kids, and us always, and as you said early on in the conversation, don't label them. Mante was that was a comment you made in terms of, oh, this bad pickney, or oh, they're so rude, or they're so, I think it's really important not to label children, and even positive labels can put pressure on kids too, and it make kids anxious, right? So I think that's very important in terms of how we interact, how we discipline, how we parent our children. And I'm going to ask at this time if both you, and I'll start with you, Mante, if you want to leave any nuggets, like for 2 minutes of any information you'd like parents to take away with grandparents, caregivers that are watching, and then we're going to open it up for questions from the public. So, Mante, you can.
I think, I mean, parenting is so hard. You know, parenting any child is challenging. And then there's that added layer of parenting Black children, which can, you know, they're dealing with that context of navigating a world where there is systemic racism and other injustices, and especially at the intersection of disability or gender identity or sexual orientation. So I think one of the biggest things I'm always learning is I will make mistakes, and I often do, but to hold myself with grace and to know that you know, we're not going to be perfect, and our kids don't expect us to be perfect. I think it's just that we often, if we feel we raise our voices, or you know, our approach to discipline wasn't the best, and we feel shame. And I think there's a lot of shame in our society, just, you know, being gentle and kind and compassionate with ourselves. And I think that in itself can be really positive for our children. And to be our children's biggest advocates, like you mentioned, Kathy, you know, you work in the school system, I work in the school system. We know, we see what happens, and really being your children's advocate, even when they may not even understand what's going on, and being their voice often, I think that's really, really critical. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Norma?
I really like that, because if we don't value our children, society won't value them at all. And we have to be really careful to speak to the behavior and not John himself. So this is the behavior that I observe, and how do we work on changing it together? As parents, though, we're their parents in the home, let's remember to be role model for our children. It's amazing. Children just watch what you do. They saturate the stuff that parents do. And sometimes you hear a 2-year-old says, "Come here." And you say, "Where did you hear that?" "Well, Mom, you said that." So it's being role model the behavior you want to see. And as they grow older, give them some opportunity to build into their lives and really value them. I know a few parents who say, "You wear that and you wear that tomorrow." Well, give a choice. Here are 2 dresses. Which would you like to wear? And tomorrow is going to be a sunny day, so you may not need a sweater, but you also don't need to wear boots. So give choices. And really value our children, even if their behaviors is not what we want. We must choose the time to value them. We must choose the time to spend with them, even when you're busy working. Take 10 minutes before bedtime, 5 minutes at dinner time, just to say, "Tell me one good thing that happened to you today." If you say, "Tell me what happened in school," "Mommy, it was fine." Tell me one good thing that happened. Tell me something that you had a challenge with. How do we work on that together?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, great. Thank you for that. So I heard no open-ended questions, right? Dig deep in the responses. I also heard important of being a role model, the importance of picking your battles, right? That's so true, really. If you wear a, you know, floral pants with a plaid shirt, right?
Oh.
That's right. It's not the end of the world, right? They're 5 years old, they're going to school, right? So pick your
Right.
battles. I heard some really great tips. And I'm going to start with a question in the chat, where there is a participant that would like some tips for solo parents. So, or solo caregivers. So what tips, Bante, would you like to start in terms of, you know, dealing with discipline issues?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I'm not a solo parent, so I don't want to speak on behalf of solo parents, but I would say, you know, as if you're in a co-parenting relationship, is trying to ensure that you and the child's parent are on the same page with respect to discipline, so that there's no inconsistency. And that happens whether parents are together or separated, or divorced. And if there's no other parent in the picture, is, you know, that heavy lifting. One of the things I think is important, is that expression, it takes a village, you know, and that applies across the board. So relying on parenting can look like your best friend. It could look like a neighbor who you have a really strong relationship with, extended family, and rely on that. And sometimes we may tend to take that burden on quite heavily on our own. And I think it's just finding people in your community who can help support
Mhm.
you, whether it's driving to soccer practices or helping with tutoring, or, you know, going to dance recitals. You know, all of those showing up in different ways can go a long way. And I think it's just, don't hesitate to reach out to your quote unquote community, your people, for that support. I think is really critical. And always take care of yourself.
Yeah, thank you for that. Norma, would you like to add anything?
I love what Mante says. One of the things I see work with some, I would say a single mom or a single dad, is like to take maybe a Saturday afternoon or a Sunday afternoon and actually develop a calendar, say what we're going to do for the week, knowing that it's flexible and it can change. So maybe on Monday, dad drives you to school, but you have to take the bus home, and who will you come with on the bus? And kids are so smart, they will help to develop that calendar. And when it needs to be changed, they will say, oh, I don't think I can do this, I really try. And together you change it, but build a structure for them. I find kids tend to go wayward if there is no structure around them, even if the structure changes a bit. So I like that. Don't try to work with a child all on your own. Even after school programs are excellent, as opposed to get home in time and stay there. You don't know what they're doing. Talk to good friends. Where I live, we have great neighbors. There's a mom who had a baby some time ago, and I say, if you ever need a hand just to leave and go to the supermarket or go for a walk, and she comes, she hands me the baby. She never asked if I had skills to look after her infant. But it's just being there for someone else and make sure somebody's there for your child and build structures. Children like structure, though they may not agree. They agree when they see themselves having some input in developing the structure.
Absolutely.
Yeah, very good words of wisdom there, Norma. And in terms of the unlearning, I have a question for you, but I'll start with a scenario. So there was a situation I came across with a student, and they wanted to he got in trouble because he was disrespectful to the teacher. But when you listen to the story of what led to this whole incident, imagine being a Black kid just trying to get an education. You're going to school and you're stopped 4 times by 4 different police people. You're searched, like, what do you have in your backpack? Right? What do you have in there? And this is in the morning. This is obviously a school-age kid going to school. So this kid is late. He's also frustrated because I can only imagine just trying to go from A to B and being stopped 4 times. You're probably not in the best of moods, right? And then, the first educator that comes across yells at him in the hall, "What are you doing in the hall? You're late," right? And he loses it. And that is not to say I encourage being disrespectful to educators. However, if you look at the approach of the adult when they saw a child in a hall late, instead of yelling at the child, they could have simply asked the child, hey, why are you late, or are you okay, right? And so the question I'd ask is regards to the unlearning, because earlier in our discussion, we spoke about unlearning. So could each of you give like two, I think, behaviors that you'd say we have as a people sort of learned as a result of being in a colonial mindset? And what do you think, and what are the things that we need to unlearn? And what do you think we should be using to help diffuse, right, situations with our kids when they come, when we're in a heightened state? So it's like a three-pronged question.
I may not remember all of the prongs.
Yeah. Well, let's start with the unlearning and
I
de-escalating.
I think of that young person after being stopped and really went to school. He could have turned back and go home, you know. However, the teacher would not have known that. So here's a situation where he comes around the corner and he's trying to get to the classroom and he's being questioned why. So one of the things that I always suggest to parents or friends, do not ask why. That just gets them more upset. There are many situations you should not ask why. Instead of saying why, because then it's a long conversation, say, it's good to see you. You're late. Let's talk about that later. Or you're late for class. We will need to meet later to talk about it. But don't ask why. Just like parents, when something happens, say, tell me more about it. That young man in the hallway wouldn't have had time or be even listening. He's such an emotional state. So validate by saying, you're here, go to your classroom, let's talk about this later. And it's amazing that teacher may be empathetic, though that youth was disrespectful. It may turn out that the youth will say, ABC happened. I am so sorry. I am so sorry. This is what caused me to be responding to you that way. So it's validating again. It's saying, don't try to discipline in a hallway. Why are you late? Why? Yeah, what happened? How can we work together later to prevent this happening? And you note the behavior so that the responses and the plan ensures the outcome is different the next time.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I touch all three prongs.
Yes. No, you did well. Thank you, Norma. Mante, do you have any
I
additional
think I'm
comments?
struggling. Yeah, I think maybe I'm just struggling a bit with the question. Is it like, was it for the parents or the educators?
Well, it had 3 points. No, it was for the parent, right? Because the child is now in trouble. So that was a scenario, but the child is now in trouble,
Right.
right? So how was a parent? Because the reaction of the parent was, oh my gosh, they're so fed up and frustrated. But I didn't want to say that was what the parent's reaction is. But as a parent, how do you or what tips? And that's why I said like the unlearning, because a lot of times as parents, when we get a call home from school and your child did X, a lot of times we don't even really get the full story or talk to our children, try to understand the behavior and what precipitated this reaction, right? And I think as parents, that's where the unlearning comes in, right? Because people just automatically say, oh, well, you're rude to the teacher, and shut it down and off the head without really digging deeper.
So I answered
Yeah, I
according
would.
to the teacher.
Okay.
So Manti, thank you for asking that question.
Yeah.
So please
Yeah,
answer
yeah,
as a parent.
Yeah.
yeah. Well, I think it's, again, going back to context, it's that many parents of African Canadian, like African descent, tend to, in many parts of the world, you have a lot of stereotypes,
Yeah.
right? So your child school think teachers are going to act in your child's best interest.
Mhm.
Not understanding that here our kids go to school and they experience systemic anti-black racism, and so when you talk about the colonial, it's that history of how black children are perceived in education as problematic, as behavioral, as threatening, as criminal, and all of that really impacts that scenario to the T that you've just described. So in terms of unlearning is how parents can shift that, oh, well, why are you misbehaving? Because you're disrespecting elders or you're disrespecting your educators, to understanding the context of how black children are educated in our school system, the systemic racism that they experience. And so being in a position of advocating constantly for your child and understand knowing what those barriers are going to be, and responding to those barriers. And that's not easy, especially, if you're a newcomer, if English is not your first language, if you don't, you know, if you don't know how to navigate that school system. But I think there are many organizations that exist out there to support you. But I think it's also having a really good relationship with your child's teacher at the beginning of the year, emailing, showing that you're engaged in that way. You don't have to be showing up to school council, but you can be emailing saying, I'm so and so's parent. Education for my child is really important. I'd like to work with you to support. I do this every year at the beginning of the year. What can you and I do to ensure the best educational outcome for my child? And what can I do to maintain this open communication and check in regularly with the teacher? That I think can go a long way in fostering a healthy and open relationship, so that when incidences like this arise, you have a rapport already. And I think that can help the child as well.
Thank you for that. And my last question I'd like to ask to both of you, because we didn't really touch much on the mental health piece. So, you would have, so let me just see the question here. So how do you, or what advice do you have when people say, oh, you are woke, right? Because there are a lot of people say, oh, you spare the rod and you spoil the child, and oh, they don't believe in mental health. What tips can you get for parents? I guess it sort of ties in with unlearning. What advice do you give for parents that would say that, they think in North America, they are woke, or they are sparing the rod and spoiling the child?
So many teenagers, and I don't think some parents realize that mental illness most often begins in the teen years. You may have younger children with other kinds of disorder, but when you look at research, mental illness, schizophrenia, bipolar, depression, all those things tend to start in the teen years. And if you you trust that the behavior you're seeing is different, it has to be different for you to wonder what is really happening. And sometimes the child can't even explain, I just feel different. I just don't want to go to school. And our response may be, is it because you're lazy? You don't want to get up on time? Mom, I really tried. You can't put it in words. So really trust that child and get some help. It may be from the counselor in the school, the guidance counselor. There are some schools that have social worker. Start there and trust that you know your child. There is a change. You don't know what the change is, but together you'll find out. Yeah, there are a lot of teenagers. And I'll briefly say, when I worked in custody, and this is research data, 50% of teenagers that are incarcerated suffer from some form of mental illness. They use the behavior to cover up what they can control. So we must really get to know our children and see, oh, something has changed here. You're not yourself. I see something happening. I don't know what it is. You don't know what it is. Let's try and find out.
Yeah, absolutely. And Mante?
I'd agree. I think there's a lot of stigma in the Black community around acknowledging mental health impacts, and we need to really start challenging that, because we are not we're doing a disservice to our children, you know, with mental health, higher incarceration rates, but also higher substance abuse with drugs and alcohol. And again, then we start to bury it under the rug. And when we see our children behaviors changing and they're retreating, or you notice that they're withdrawn or unhappy, and they don't want to talk about it, but you know, that seeking out that support as a parent, you can seek out support through, you know, there are many like social workers or psychologists, and you know, there's an underrepresentation of Black mental health professionals, but anyone who's interested, I keep a repertoire of them, because I really feel it's important to work with somebody who has a culturally responsive and culturally relevant approach to mental health, and having ongoing conversations with your children. But if we don't recognize as a problem, we're not going to be able to take steps to address it. So if we don't recognize mental illness as an issue, then when our kids experience depression or anxiety or other mental health issues, we're not going to be able to acknowledge them. And I would also say intergenerational trauma is a big one that we don't talk about. You know, many communities who experience, you know, ongoing systemic injustices, and there is naturally intergenerational trauma. And so parents are navigating these issues, these traumas on their own without even acknowledging or diagnosing them. Can you imagine how challenging it is for them to support their kids who are experiencing mental health? So it's that idea of, you know, sometimes before we can help our kids, we need to help ourselves. And that in itself can be really challenging.
Yeah, thank you. And I think, because another question popped up, I know I said it was the last question, but I think you kind of, Mante, covered it, but feel free to add anything else. So it is, how can parents be encouraged to seek professional help and not be consumed by feelings of shame and failure?
Oh, I love that question. You know, it goes to being compassionate, offering yourself compassion. We are all in pain as human beings. And I think that the first thing that you can ever do to heal yourself is to get the support that you need. And I really believe in Black mental health support, that seeking out people who can understand what it means to navigate mental health challenges as a Black person. It's very unique. And I don't want to paint all Black people with the same brush, but I've noticed it for myself. And so really making the effort, and you know, I understand, we have lack of resources, lack of Black mental health professionals, and access to mental health support is very limited. So even, you know, going online to YouTube, and they're really great podcasts, they're really great YouTube professional psychologists and mental health professionals who are online. I'm happy to share some resources if you want, but I think it's really starting to be kind to yourself and acknowledging that I may not have all the answers, but I need help, and starting to get that help can go a long way. And it can take years to start to feel. But with that, I have to run. I just want to say thank you to everyone for having me today. It was such a pleasure to spend time with you, Norma and Kathy, and great questions from the audience. I'm really humbled to have been able to be here.
Yeah, and thank you too, because that brings us to the end of our show. And I just wanted to put a little caveat on your answer, which is when you go on YouTube, also make sure you verify your sources, because you can be, you know, led astray on YouTube. So it's really good to verify your sources and check multiple sources too. and
Yes.
find out who's in the
Absolutely.
website, right? Really, really important. So thank you so much.
Oh yeah, I meant accredited people.
Yes.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's why I'm happy to share those resources.
Yes, please. And we, reach out to Mante, and because we know she's a credible resource. So yes, and we have another request in the chat. Mante, if you could please share those resources.
I will. Yes. Okay.
Thank you so much
Thank you.
for amazing panelists, and thank you to our audience for attending today's Fireside Chat. Next Sunday, we will have as our topic, becoming indispensable to your school system. How can we add value to our school system? So thank you, everyone. I hope you enjoyed ABC's Woman Fireside Chat. Thank you.
Bye.
Look how far you have come on your own, but never alone. Through the rain and through the shine, here's your moment.